From the once powerful cartel leader, who is now locked up for 23 hours each day, to the cartel member who was murdered the day after being transferred to a new prison, cartel members are faced with horrifying conditions in prison. In this video, I will be pulling back the curtains on the prison experience of incarcerated cartel members. They have no human contact. In some prisons, cartel members are denied human contact, and this is evident in the case of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, one of the most feared drug lords, was extradited to the U.S. in 2017 to face charges of drug trafficking, conspiracy association, organized crime against health, money laundering, homicide, illegal possession of firearms, kidnapping, and murder. In 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years to be served in the most secure supermax prison in the U.S., ADX Florence. As an inmate at ADX, El Chapo is forced to live in a 7 by 12-foot concrete cell. The cell is soundproof, preventing any communication with fellow inmates. This in turn ensures that inmates are completely cut off from any form of human interaction, a factor that can lead to severe psychological distress. Inside his cell, there are basic amenities, a bed, desk, and chair, which are made of concrete and fixed to the walls, ensuring they cannot be moved or used as weapons. The toilet and shower areas are equipped with time-controlled water systems to prevent flooding. Electricity is regulated by the guards, who have been known to cut off access to lights at specific times. A small window, measuring 42 inches tall and 4 inches wide, faces upwards to the sky and offers no view of the outside world, leaving the once powerful drug lord disoriented and unaware of his surroundings. El Chapo spends 23 hours in his cell and is allowed only 1 hour of recreation each day. This time is spent in a concrete pit resembling an empty pool, where he is escorted by 3 guards. Experts have noted that the 23-hour isolation period can result in a range of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and hallucinations. ADX. Florence is built and designed to stop escapes and keep the public safe, but the harsh living conditions take a serious mental toll on inmates, raising concerns about whether this kind of punishment is right. Chapo is asked to be allowed visits from his wife and daughters, but it's unlikely his request will be approved. While El Chapo is struggling with the harsh realities of life in a supermax prison, this next cartel member had an entirely different prison experience. They are given preferential treatment. Throughout history, there have been instances of powerful cartel members continuing to call the shots while in prison, with Pablo Escobar being one notable example. The richest criminal in history, Pablo Escobar, earned that title after decades of leading the Medellin cartel and evading the Colombian government. His fear of extradition led him to launch a violent campaign against the state, targeting politicians, judges, and journalists who opposed him. When Escobar realized that his violent campaign could not save him, he decided to surrender to the government on the condition that he would not be extradited and would be allowed to build his own prison. Escobar's prison, called La Catedral, is situated on a hill overlooking Medellin. The prison was a fortress of luxury, complete with amenities fit for a king. Officially, La Catedral was a prison, but in reality, it was a personal palace where Escobar continued to reign as the kingpin of the Medellin cartel. The facility was designed to cater to Escobar's every desire, blurring the lines between punishment and privilege. La Catedral was equipped with amenities that would make any luxury resort envious. It featured a football pitch, a bar, and even a disco. Escobar's quarters were lavishly furnished, providing him with the comfort and luxury he was used to. The guards at La Catedral were not typical prison staff. They were handpicked by Escobar, effectively serving as his personal security detail. Their loyalty lay with the drug lord, ensuring his safety and comfort rather than enforcing any semblance of discipline. This arrangement allowed Escobar to continue his criminal operations while in prison. He carried out drug deals, managed his empire, and entertained guests with impunity. He also hosted extravagant parties with professional soccer players, celebrities, and politicians in attendance. On one occasion, the Colombian national football team visited for a friendly match, with Escobar himself joining in the game. The prison guards, acting more like waiters, served drinks and catered to the guests. Despite the outward appearance of a carefree existence, Escobar's time at La Catedral was not without its darker moments. The prison's isolation and lack of oversight allowed Escobar to deal with internal disputes with brutal efficiency. Reports emerged of Escobar torturing and executing 4 of his lieutenants within the prison walls over a financial disagreement. This was proof that the government had given him preferential treatment and could not control his actions, even though he was supposedly in prison. Up next is a drug lord whose time in prison pushed him to betray the bond he swore to protect. They turned government informants. When faced with the harsh realities of prison life, it's not uncommon for some cartel members to turn government informant in hopes of receiving reduced sentences. That's exactly what happened in the case of Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. In the 1980s, the Gambino crime family was embroiled in a series of power struggles and internal conflicts that would ultimately lead to a shift in its leadership. At the heart of this turmoil was Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, whose loyalty to the family was tested during this period. In December 1985, the Gambino family boss Paul Castellano was assassinated, causing a shift in the family's leadership. The assassination was ordered by John Gotti, but Gravano also played a role in it. Gotti emerged as the new boss, with Gravano serving as his trusted underboss. In a shocking turn of events, Gravano's initial support for Gotti soon began to reduce as he observed the flamboyant and reckless behavior of the new boss. Gotti's love for public displays of wealth and power drew unwanted attention from law enforcement, placing the entire organization under increased scrutiny. Gravano, who had always valued discretion and strategic thinking, found himself at odds with Gotti's leadership style. In December 1990, the FBI arrested Gotti, Gravano, and other high-ranking members of the Gambino family in a sweeping raid. The charges against them were serious, including racketeering, murder, and conspiracy. At that point, Gravano made a decision that would alter the course of his life and the fate of the mafia. He decided to become a government informant. By turning informant, Gravano became the highest-ranking member of a New York crime family to break the mafia's code of silence, known as omerta. His testimony during Gotti's trial in 1992 was a bombshell, providing the government with insider information on the inner workings of the Gambino family. Gravano revealed the conspiracy behind Castellano's assassination and implicated Gotti in multiple murders. The information provided by Gravano was crucial in proving Gotti's guilt. As a result, Gotti was convicted and received a life sentence with no chance of being released on parole. Gravano's decision to testify against Gotti and other mobsters destabilized the mafia world. It was a huge blow to the Gambino family's operations and influence. Numerous high-ranking members of the family were indicted and convicted based on Gravano's testimony. Gravano was sentenced to 5 years in prison in 1994. His cooperation with the government was the reason he received a reduced sentence. After he was released, Gravano entered the Witness Protection Program, adopting a new identity in an attempt to start afresh. Up next is an instance where cartel members are forced to organize and participate in riots. They participate in riots. Behind bars, cartel members sometimes find ways to try and regain some of the power that they have lost. In September 1971, a group of inmates at the Attica Correctional Facility decided to seize control of the facility. The uprising was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated move. At the time, the prison was overcrowded, and it is believed that the inmates involved were seeking to negotiate with the prison authorities to improve their living conditions. As the takeover unfolded, the inmates took hostages, including correctional officers and civilian employees, to use as leverage in their negotiations with the state. They were determined to make their voices heard and to get the authorities to commit to fulfilling their demands. In the end, the armed forces forcefully took back control of the facility. 39 people lost their lives in the process, 10 of which were correctional officers and civilian employees. 3 inmates were killed by other inmates, and 1 guard later died as a result of injuries sustained during the uprising. Attica was home to Joseph Gallo of the Colombo crime family. He began his criminal career as a hitman and enforcer for the Profaci crime family before forming his own crew, which consisted of his 2 brothers. In November 1961, Gallo was arrested and convicted of conspiracy and extortion for attempting to extort money from a businessman. He was ultimately sentenced to 7 to 14 years in prison. Throughout his time in prison, Gallo was transferred to 3 prisons, one of which was Attica. While he was in prison, the Profaci family became the Colombo family, and Gallo couldn't wait to get out of prison to return to the family. He was released from prison in 1971. The same year, the inmates at Attica took over the prison. It's possible that Gallo participated in the planning of the riot before he was released. Up next is a sad reality that many incarcerated cartel members have to face. They become terminally ill. It's not uncommon for cartel members to become terminally ill behind bars, and that's exactly what happened in the case of Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. In the 1970s, Colombia was becoming a major hub for the cocaine trade. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela saw an opportunity to capitalize on this growing market. Alongside his brother Miguel, he began to establish connections with local drug traffickers, gradually building a network that would lay the foundation for the Cali cartel. Unlike their rivals in the Medellin cartel, the Rodriguez Orihuela brothers adopted a more business-like approach to drug trafficking, focusing on efficiency and organization rather than violence and intimidation. The Cali cartel rose to power by forming strategic alliances with other criminal organizations. Rodriguez Orihuela was a clever negotiator who established partnerships with drug traffickers in Mexico and the Caribbean, creating a vast network across the Americas. These alliances enhanced the cartel's distribution abilities and provided intelligence on rival operations. In 1995, a series of coordinated raids were launched against the Cali cartel, resulting in the arrest of several high-ranking members. In June 1995, Gilberto Rodriguez Orihuela was apprehended in a dramatic raid on a luxury apartment in Cali. His arrest marked the beginning of the end for the Cali cartel, as it set off a chain reaction that led to the capture of other key figures, including his brother Miguel. He was extradited to the United States in December 2004, and in 2006, he and his brother Miguel pleaded guilty to charges of conspiring to import cocaine into the U.S. They were both sentenced to 30 years in prison for their crimes. In 2020, Rodriguez Orihuela applied to a Miami federal judge seeking compassionate release. He had only served half of his term, but he had been diagnosed with a terminal disease, and his health was fast declining. The judge rejected the application, stating that he did not find any compelling reason to grant him the release. In March 2022, Orihuela died of lymphoma at a medical center and federal correctional institution in Butner. While many terminal diseases occur naturally, there are instances where correctional officers intentionally inflict pain on inmates. They are mistreated by correctional officers. Due to the brutal nature of their crimes, some cartel members become targets of correctional officers who go to great lengths to punish them. In the mid-1990s, USP Florence High was a fortress of high-security confinement, housing some of the most dangerous inmates in the United States. Within its walls, a group of correctional officers, infamously dubbed the Cowboys, began to abuse their authority. The timeline of their misconduct began in January 1995. These officers operated with blatant disregard for the rules. The officers targeted and bullied inmates, beating and even choking them. The Cowboys' reign of terror extended beyond physical violence. They were known to mix waste into the inmates' meals to poison them. Not only did the Cowboys maltreat the inmates, they also mistreated fellow officers. Those who dared to speak out against their cruel actions faced threats and retaliation. The prison, meant to be a place of order and security, became a playground for these rogue officers. In 2000, 7 officers who were part of the Cowboys were prosecuted for their misconduct, which lasted between 1995 and 1997. The trial began in 2003, and it resulted in the conviction of officers Mike LaValle, Rod Schultz, and Robert Verbicus for violating an inmate's civil rights and conspiring to do so. USP Florence High was once home to drug lord Osiel Cardenas Guillen, the Nuestra crime family boss, and several members of the Barrio Azteca. They may have been victims of mistreatment at the hands of the correctional officers. In some cases, cartel members are faced with life-threatening situations, like being poisoned behind bars. They are poisoned in prison. In June 2011, 300 inmates and several staff members of the United States Penitentiary, Canaan, became ill after eating chicken in the prison dining room. It was determined that the cause of the outbreak was salmonella poisoning. This incident was one of the largest outbreaks of salmonella poisoning in the history of U.S. institutions. It is very likely that Tijuana cartel boss Benjamin Arellano Felix was in USP Canaan at the time of the incident. In the late 1980s, Benjamin Arellano Felix and his brothers took over a criminal enterprise from their uncle, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. This marked the beginning of the Tijuana cartel, a major player in the illicit drug trade. Based mainly in the border city of Tijuana, the cartel quickly established itself as a dominant force, controlling the smuggling routes into the United States. The Tijuana cartel's operations relied heavily on strategic bribery. It is said that the organization spent an estimated $1 million per week to secure the cooperation of Mexican politicians and law enforcement. This approach allowed them to operate without fear, and members continued to evade capture while expanding their empire. They also engaged in high-profile assassinations and violent confrontations with rival cartels. The arrest of Benjamin Arellano Felix in March 2002 was a defining moment in the battle against the Tijuana Tijuana cartel. After years of evading capture, Benjamin's downfall came through an unexpected lead. The United States Drug Enforcement Administration discovered that his oldest daughter had a distinctive facial deformity, which became the key to tracking him down. This piece of information eventually led to his arrest by the Mexican Army in Puebla, Mexico. In April 2011, Benjamin was extradited to the United States to face charges of trafficking cocaine into California. In January 2012, he pleaded guilty to racketeering and conspiracy to launder money. 3 months later, he was sentenced to 25 years in a U.S. federal prison, and this marked the end of an era for the Tijuana cartel. Up next is another harsh reality that cartel members face behind bars, one that has led to the deaths of many. They receive poor health care. When it comes to healthcare, the prison system falls short. This is why cartel members who develop severe illnesses behind bars or are arrested while already sick rarely survive. This can be seen in the case of Matteo Messina Denaro. On the 16th of January 2023, Italian authorities finally apprehended the elusive mafia boss, Matteo Messina Denaro, in Palermo. Denaro, who was suffering from colon cancer, was arrested near a private clinic where he was receiving chemotherapy under a false name. Prior to his arrest, Denaro had been on the run since 1993, but his cancer diagnosis and efforts to seek treatment ultimately led to his capture. The arrest, which involved over 100 members of the armed forces, was a carefully planned operation. Once in custody, Denaro was transferred to the high-security prison of L'Aquila, where he was placed under the strict Article 41 bis regime. This notorious prison regime is designed to isolate mafia bosses, cutting off their communication with the outside world. As time passed, Denaro's health continued to decline. The cancer, which had already taken a significant toll on his body, advanced rapidly, leaving him frail and vulnerable. As the cancer progressed, Denaro's situation became increasingly dire. On the 24th of September 2023, he fell into an irreversible coma. The best day, he passed away at the age of 61. At the peak of his criminal career, he was said to command around 900 men. He also played a huge role in the reorganization of the 20 mafia families Trapani into one single mandamento. Although he was involved in the drug trade on an international level, Denaro's major source of wealth was extortion. He and his men forced business owners to pay money for protection regularly. On the legal front, he was a businessman who had stakes in supermarkets and was involved in the products of olive oil. However, it was his drug connection to the Contreras Caruana clan that put him on the FBI's radar and led to his eventual downfall. Along with receiving poor health care, some cartel members develop mental health issues in prison that eventually become life-threatening. They become suicidal. Life in prison often takes a toll on inmates' mental health, and that's exactly what happened to Jose Martin Vega. On May 1, 2010, Jose Martin Vega, an inmate at ADX Florence, used a bedsheet to take his own life in his cell. The circumstances of his death raised serious questions about the treatment he received at ADX Florence and the effect it had on his mental health. Vega was convicted on 15 counts of racketeering and armed drug trafficking in 1995 and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences at the age of 20. While serving his term at federal prison in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, Vega made a decision that would lead to the end of his life. In March 2003, he attacked an associate warden with a razor blade during a late morning meal. The attack led to a struggle in which Vega was subdued, injected with a sedative, and allegedly beaten by prison staff for over an hour. Following this violent episode, Vega was transferred to the nearby Allenwood Federal Prison Facility, where he was placed on suicide status. This was a direct response to his increasingly erratic behavior and the potential risk he posed to himself and others. Soon after, Vega was moved to the U.S. Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, for further evaluation. It was here that he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Despite this diagnosis, Vega's journey through the prison system continued to be chaotic. In July 2003, he was charged in federal court for his attack on the warden and received an additional sentence of 188 months, further extending his already lengthy imprisonment. Vega's complaints about the treatment he received following the attack were dismissed by prison officials, and he was subsequently transferred to ADX Florence in April 2004. Vega was placed in the control unit, a section of the prison reserved for the most difficult inmates. For Jose Martin Vega, the conditions at ADX Florence were particularly harsh. When he arrived at the facility, his mental health was already fragile as a result of his schizophrenia diagnosis. The isolation and lack of adequate mental health care worsened his condition, leading to a rapid deterioration of his psychological state. As time passed, Vega's behavior became increasingly erratic as his mental health declined. At some point, he believed that the guards were poisoning his food food and spraying harmful substances into his cell. He remained like this until he eventually took his own life. While some cartel members like Vega struggle with mental health issues behind bars, others face enemies and don't make it out alive. They are murdered. Sometimes not even being behind bars is enough to protect cartel members from the wrath of their enemies. This is evident in the case of Whitey Bulger. On October 29, 2018, famous boss of the Winter Hill Gang, Whitey Bulger was transferred to the United States Penitentiary, Hazleton, in West Virginia. The facility was known for its violent inmate population, and Bulger's arrival was met with apprehension. On October 30, 2018, the day after his transfer, Bulger, then 89 years old and in a wheelchair, was found dead in his cell. He had been brutally beaten by fellow inmates, armed with a sock wrap padlock and a shiv. His eyes were in a bad state, and his tongue almost cut off, leaving him unrecognizable, according to a law enforcement official. The murder of Bulger was the third homicide at the prison in a 40-day span, and it drew attention to the dangerous understaffing issues that correctional officers had warned Congress about just days before his death. Throughout the 1980s, Bulger ran a criminal empire that continued to expand. He soon began extorting drug dealers, demanding payments to spare their lives, and maintained strict control over drug operations in his territory. Investigators later estimated that Bulger made around $30 million from shaking down dealers. Despite his criminal activities, Bulger managed to evade law enforcement for years, thanks in part to his connections with the FBI. However, by the early 1990s, the walls began to close in on him. In April 1994, a task force began probing Bulger's illegal operations, leading to his decision to flee Boston in December 1994. In June 2011, Bulger was captured in Santa Monica, California, marking the end of a 16-year manhunt. The Bulger Fugitive Task Force received a tip on his whereabouts from a woman in Iceland and managed to track him down. When authorities stormed his apartment, they discovered over $800,000 in cash, 30 firearms, and a collection of fake IDs. In August 2013, Bulger was found guilty on 31 counts, including racketeering and complicity in 11 murders. He was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 5 years in prison. He was also ordered to forfeit $25.2 million and pay $19.5 million in restitution. Following his sentencing, Bulger was transferred to various federal prisons, where he faced a series of challenges. His health began to decline, and he was involved in several altercations with fellow inmates. Former Massachusetts-based mafia hitman and fellow inmate Fotios Freddy Gaius was identified as the primary suspect in Bulger's murder. Up next is something that happens when cartel members from rival groups are incarcerated together. They get into deadly altercations. Rival cartel members often go to war behind bars to establish dominance over other groups. One such incident took place at the United States Penitentiary Beaumont. On the morning of January 31, 2022, the United States Penitentiary Beaumont became the scene of a violent and deadly attack. 7 MS-13 members, driven by orders from their leadership, launched a coordinated assault on associates of the Mexican Mafia and the Sureños. The attack unfolded in the AA housing unit, where the assailants targeted Guillermo Riojas and Andrew Pineda, among others. The assault began with Juan Carlos Rivas Morellera stabbing Guillermo Riojas twice in the chest. As Riojas fell to the ground, other MS-13 members joined in, delivering further stabbings and kicks. The violence quickly escalated as the attackers turned their attention to Andrew Pineda and other Sureños members, cornering and repeatedly stabbing them in a frenzy that lasted approximately 3 minutes. Prison officials responded swiftly to the chaos, but the damage had already been done. Riojas and Pineda succumbed to their injuries, while 2 other Sureños members were severely injured but survived. The severity of the attack prompted the United States Bureau of Prisons to impose a nationwide lockdown. In the aftermath of the attack, a federal grand jury indicted the 7 MS-13 members involved, charging them with racketeering conspiracy, murder in aid of racketeering, and other related offenses. MS-13, also known as La Mara Salvatrucha, is a transnational criminal organization that originated in Los Angeles, California during the 1980s. Composed primarily of immigrants from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, quickly expanded its influence across the United States and beyond. With an estimated membership of over 10,000, the gang is notorious for its brutal tactics and involvement in various criminal activities, including drug trafficking, extortion, and murder. In addition to engaging in altercations with rivals, cartel members in prison often live in constant fear due to the dangers of prison life. They live in constant fear. Many prisons housing cartel members are known for being dangerous. One example is the United States Penitentiary, Allenwood. This facility has seen an alarming number of inmate murders over the years, including the 1996 killing of Andrew Hunt Marty. In April 1996, United States Penitentiary, Allenwood witnessed a murder that left the inmates shocked. Inmate Andrew Hunt Marty was murdered by his cellmate David Paul Hammer. David Paul Hammer, a career criminal with a rap sheet as long as it was severe, was serving a 1,200-year sentence for a litany of crimes, including larceny, shooting with intent to kill, kidnapping, and making bomb threats. The murder took place in the Special Housing Unit, a section of the prison reserved for the most violent inmates. On that fateful day in April, Hammer allegedly strangled Marty to death using a piece of homemade cord. In the aftermath of the murder, Hammer pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death by the electric chair. In September 2005, USP Allenwood witnessed another brutal murder. 50-year-old inmate Alvin Allery was murdered by Ritz Williams and Sean Kuya, who were no strangers to violence. Williams was already serving a lengthy sentence for murder, while Kuya was incarcerated for weapons violations. Together, they planned a premeditated attack on Allery. Armed with a homemade knife, Williams and Kuya ambushed Allery, stabbing him 10 times. They also kicked him in the head and torso repeatedly. In 2013, Williams and Kuya pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, acknowledging their roles in the heinous crime. The court sentenced them to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As of March 2022, Williams was incarcerated at USP Victorville, while Kuya was held at ADX Florence. In December 2020, USP Allenwood was once again the scene of a shocking attack. Abdul Rahman El-Banasawi, a Canadian inmate convicted of terrorism-related offenses, attacked 2 correctional officers. The attack was sudden and brutal, with El-Banasawi stabbing one officer in the neck and eye, leaving him critically injured. The injured officers were rushed to Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, where they received urgent medical attention. Despite the severity of their injuries, both officers survived, though one tragically lost an eye. In the wake of the attack, El-Banasawi was swiftly transferred to ADX Florence. Notorious drug dealer Howard Mason, incarcerated at USP Allenwood, has witnessed at least one murder there, leaving him in constant fear for his life. Knowing the cruel fate that awaits them in prison, it's no wonder that cartel members go to extreme lengths to evade capture for as long as they can. Check out any of our other videos by clicking the cards on your screen.